You know, usually when we talk about ancient history, we kind of expect these neat, isolated pockets of culture.
Oh, for sure. Like the Greeks were over here doing their philosophy and the ancient Indians were over there building their traditions.
Right. And never the twain shall meet. So it is always just wild to me when you find these strange, echoing connections across the world. Take Pythagoras, for example.
The ancient Greek philosopher.
Yeah.
Basically, most of us just know him for the triangle theorem that tortured us in high school geometry.
Yeah, exactly. But here is something they do not teach you in math class. Pythagoras actually claimed to remember his past lives.
Wait, really? Like specific lives?
Yes. He said he was once a guy named Euphorbus who fought in the Trojan War,
Wow.
and he was wounded by Menelaus. He even went into a temple once and recognized the very shield Menelaus had taken from him in that past life.
It's an incredible story. But, in Greek literary history, it's an almost completely isolated incident.
Right.
It was seen as this bizarre, unique superpower that only Pythagoras possessed.
But then, and this is why we are here today, you travel east to India, and suddenly that isolated parlor trick is the entire foundation of reality. Remembering past lives wasn't some anomaly, it was a cornerstone of ancient traditions.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the mission of our deep dive today. We are exploring the Jataka. Specifically, we have a stack of translated excerpts from Book 1 of this massive ancient collection of Buddhist birth stories. And we're not just looking at these as religious lore, we're looking at them as a rich psychological roadmap.
Yeah, the doctrine of transmigration, this whole cycle of rebirth, it provided an authentic historical background to the Buddha's life. It took everyday human struggles like a bad day at work, a petty argument, or just a moment of laziness, and turned them into these cosmic dramas spanning eons. It's a way of explaining the why behind our present behaviors by looking at the deep, deep past.
I am just marveling at how these texts connect ancient Greek philosophical quirks to Eastern spiritual traditions. It's like the ultimate interconnected web.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can really get into the stories themselves, you, the listener, really need to understand the architecture of a Jataka tale.
Yeah, you have to know the blueprint.
Right, there is a very specific blueprint here.
It is highly structured. So in total, the Jataka collection contains 550 stories, and they are divided into 22 books. But the division isn't by theme or chronological order or anything like that.
Which is what you would expect, right?
Exactly. Instead, it's based on the number of verses, or gathas, in the story. So Book 1 contains 150 stories, and every single story in that book quotes exactly one verse. Book 2 has stories with 2 verses, and it scales all the way up to the 22nd book, where stories have just a massive number of verses.
And every single one of those 550 stories follows a strict 4-part formula. It always starts with the story of the present, basically what real-time event was happening in the Buddha's life that prompted him to speak.
Setting the stage. Right. Then there's the story of the past, which is the flashback to a previous existence. Third, you get the verse, which is the moral or the proverb of the story. And finally, the identification.
The reveal.
Yeah, where the Buddha reveals which person in the present-day audience was which character in the past life flashback.
And the linguistic history here is key to understanding how they were built. Those verses, the gathas, are actually the oldest part of the text.
Right. The sources compare them to ancient proverbs, like how we use the phrase Hobson's choice in English.
Exactly. Originally, people probably just knew the proverb. But over time, the prose stories, the flashbacks, were built up and crystallized around these verses to explain their context to a broader audience.
It is like a modern psychological case study, or even like a courtroom drama. Think about it. First, you see the present-day symptom, or the crime. Let's say a monk is acting out or giving up on his meditation. That's part 1. Then, the Buddha acts as the ultimate expert witness and gives you the extensive flashback to the root cause of this behavior in a past life. Then you get the legal precedent, or the moral, which is the verse. And finally, the verdict, where he points to the people in the room and says, "You were the victim and you were the culprit."
What's fascinating here is that this framework requires a narrator with absolute, unflinching omniscience.
Totally.
The Buddha uses this structure to demonstrate a profound psychological truth, which is that human habits are not random.
We should probably define a crucial term here before we go any further, because it comes up in every single story. In these past life flashbacks, the central hero is always referred to as the bodhisattva.
Right, the bodhisattva essentially translates to the Buddha in training. It's the being who will eventually become the enlightened Buddha. But in these stories, he is navigating the messy reality of countless previous lives.
Sometimes he's a king, sometimes a merchant, sometimes an animal. And viewing life through that lens really changes how you look at your own daily struggles. Think of karma not as some mystical scoreboard, but like a groove on a vinyl record. Every time you give in to laziness or greed, you carve that groove a little deeper.
That's a great way to put it.
Do it enough times across multiple lifetimes, and you are stuck in a psychological loop.
Which is exactly what the Buddha is trying to show his followers when they hit a wall. Let's look at how this framework addresses those everyday psychological hurdles, starting with a story about giving up. This is the Vanchapatha Jataka, or story number 2 in book 1.
Okay, so the story of the present features a brother, a monk, who just totally gave up. He went into the forest to meditate, couldn't get a glimmer of insight, and came crawling back to the monastery feeling like an absolute failure.
We've all been there.
Right. Think about anyone who has ever started a massive project, a new career, learning a language, a fitness journey, hit a plateau, and just decided, I'm not cut out for this.
So the Buddha deploys the flashback to the story of the past to show this monk that his faint-heartedness isn't a new flaw. It's a cosmic pattern. The Buddha recalls a time when he, as the Bodhisattva, was a merchant leading a caravan of 500 carts across a 60-league desert.
And the text makes sure you know this desert is brutal. The sand is so fine it slips through your fingers, and during the day it gets as hot as a bed of charcoal embers. They can only travel by night, using a desert pilot who navigates by the stars.
On the very last night, when they are only 7 miles from the edge of the desert, they throw away their excess wood and water to lighten the load, expecting to be out by dawn.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake, because the pilot, exhausted, falls asleep. The oxen slowly turn around in the dark, and they march right back to where they started. When the sun comes up, they realize they are doomed. No water, no wood. Everyone in the caravan throws themselves under the carts in absolute despair.
The psychological toll of that moment must be unimaginable. You thought you were at the finish line, and suddenly you are back at square one, but with zero resources. It's the ultimate metaphor for burnout.
Everyone gives up entirely.
Everyone except the leader, the Bodhisattva. He walks around in the cool morning air and spots a tiny tuft of kusa grass. He realizes there must be water deep underground for that grass to survive. So he orders a hole dug. They dig down 60 cubits, which is incredible deep, and they hit solid rock.
And again, the collective loses heart. The groove of despair kicks in. But the leader gets down in the hole, presses his ear to the rock, and hears water flowing beneath it.
Oh, wow.
He climbs out and calls upon a young serving lad. He tells him, if you give in, we shall all perish. Take this iron sledgehammer, go down into the hole, and strike the rock.
And this lad, resolute where everyone else had lost heart, goes down, swings the hammer, and splits the rock. Water shoots up as high as a palm tree. The caravan is saved.
And then comes the identification.
Right. The Buddha looks at the modern-day monk who just gave up his meditation and says, you were that serving lad. In the past, you persevered, broke the rock, and saved us all. Why are you giving up now?
It is such a brilliant motivational tool. He's not scolding the monk. He's reminding him of his own inherent resilience. He's saying, you have overcome worse than this. The strength is already in your historical DNA.
But if perseverance is the virtue that saves the collective, the text also explores the vice that destroys the individual, which is unchecked greed. This is the Jataka, story number 3.
Oh, yes.
It's about 2 hawkers selling pots and pans in a city. One is an honest hawker.
And they encounter a poor, formerly wealthy family, just a girl and her grandmother, who have an old, grimy bowl. The girl begs her grandmother to trade it to the greedy hawker for a trinket. The greedy hawker takes the bowl, scratches it with a needle, and realizes instantly that under the grime, it is solid gold.
Worth a fortune.
Yeah, worth 100,000 pieces of money.
Yeah. But his greed takes over. He wants it for nothing, so he throws it on the ground, says it's not even worth half a farthing, and storms out. He's basically planning to come back later and get it for free when they are desperate.
But then the honest hawker comes down the street.
Yep. They offer him the same bowl. He recognizes it's gold, and instead of lying, he tells them the truth. He gives them all the money he has, 500 pieces, plus his entire stock of wares, only keeping his scales, his bag, and 8 coins to pay the riverboatman to get home.
Setting the stage for the greedy hawker's return. He comes back, pretending he'll do them a favor and take the quote-unquote worthless bowl. The grandmother unleashes on him, telling him an upright hawker already paid them 1,000 pieces for it.
Wait, hold on a second. Here's where it gets really interesting. When the greedy hawker realizes he lost the golden bowl, the text says he goes completely mad. He throws away his money, rips off his clothes, grabs his scale beam as a club, and chases the honest hawker to the river. He watches the boat pull away, and his intense sorrow is so great that blood gushes from his lips, and his heart literally cracks like mud at the bottom of a dried-up tank.
Yeah, it's intense.
And he just dies right there on the riverbank. I mean, isn't that an incredibly extreme punishment for just being a bad negotiator? A guy's heart physically cracks open over a bad business deal.
It sounds absurd if you read it literally, but we have to remember these are vivid, visceral metaphors. The physical cracking of his heart is a manifestation of the spiritual damage greed inflicts.
Okay, that makes sense.
The golden bowl itself is a classic Buddhist metaphor for the inherent value within everyone, obscured by the grime of daily life. The greedy hawker saw the value but tried to exploit it, and the resulting internal rot destroyed him. It's that vinyl record groove of greed deepening until the record literally shatters.
And the identification reveals that this greedy hawker was Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin and greatest rival. This was the moment Devadatta formed his very first cosmic grudge against the Buddha, a grudge he carried through countless lifetimes.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, looking at those two stories together, they lay the groundwork for how to navigate the world. The lad with the sledgehammer saves everyone. The hawker isolates and destroys himself.
Now, a modern listener might think all Buddhist teachings are this intense, focused on life or death, moral purity, and ascetics, living in the woods.
Sure.
But the Jatakas are often incredibly grounded in ancient hustle culture and workplace satire. They show that the Bodhisattva wasn't always a solemn monk. Sometimes he was just a very shrewd, clever human being navigating a market economy.
The Kalakasiya Jata, story number 4, perfectly illustrates this. The story of the present focuses on a monk nicknamed Little Wayman. Now, Little Wayman was known as a dullard. He was so intellectually limited that he couldn't memorize a single 4-line stanza in 4 entire months. His older brother, who was a brilliant monk, actually expelled him from the monastery out of frustration.
Think about the modern equivalent of that. A student who learns differently being told by the traditional education system that they are worthless and literally kicking them out. Little Wayman feels like a total failure. But the Buddha intervenes. Instead of giving him a complex text to memorize, he hands Little Wayman a perfectly clean cloth and tells him to sit facing the sun, handling the cloth and repeating the words, removal of impurity.
As Little Wayman sweats and nervously handles the cloth, it gets dirty. He looks down and suddenly has this profound realization. He says, "It is my body that destroyed the original purity of the cloth. Impermanent indeed are all compounded things." And in that moment, he reaches full enlightenment.
It's a beautiful teaching on how enlightenment doesn't require academic brilliance. It requires genuine realization. But to explain why Little Wayman was able to achieve this, the Buddha tells the story of the past, which is essentially a masterclass in ancient entrepreneurship. It's the story of the mouse merchant.
In this past life, the Bodhisattva is a wise treasurer. He points to a dead mouse on the street and says, any decent young fellow with his wits about him has only to pick that mouse up and he might start a business and keep a wife. Little Wayman, in his past life, is a poor young man who overhears this and takes it literally.
He essentially pulls off the ancient equivalent of that internet guy who traded a red paperclip up to a house.
That's exactly what it is.
We don't need to list every single transaction, but the sequence of trades is brilliant. He trades the dead mouse for a farthing to a tavern for cat food.
Right, and then he uses that to buy molasses, sets up a water station for flower gatherers, gets flowers in return, sells those, and he keeps compounding his capital.
He leverages natural disasters, clearing a storm-ravaged royal garden for the wood, which he sells to a potter.
And he builds goodwill by giving free water to 500 grass mowers. So when a horse dealer arrives in town needing fodder, the mowers give him their grass, allowing him to basically corner the market on horse feed.
The ultimate monopoly. And the grand finale is when a large merchant ship arrives in port. He rents a fancy carriage on credit, goes down to the docks looking like a VIP, and buys the entire ship's cargo on credit, leaving his signet ring as a deposit.
And when 100 other merchants show up to buy the goods, they find out he owns the exclusive rights, they all have to pay him a premium, and he walks away with 200,000 pieces of money, all in 4 months, starting with a dead mouse.
It really challenges our preconceptions of Buddhism, doesn't it? We tend to associate it heavily with renunciation.
It does. But this story reveals Buddhism's deep engagement with lay life. It's not just about monks in forests. It celebrates applied intelligence, resourcefulness, and understanding the actual practical value of things in the real world.
And speaking of understanding the true value of things, we have to talk about the Tenolali Jataka, story number 5. This one is pure, timeless workplace satire. It's about the dangers of hiring yes men, and I guarantee anyone listening who has ever dealt with corporate bureaucracy will relate to this.
Oh, absolutely. The king of Benares has a wise valuer, the Bodhisattva, who fairly prices elephants, horses, and jewels for the royal treasury. But the king is greedy. He thinks the valuer is spending too much of the royal funds by paying fair market value. So he looks out his window, sees a stupid, greedy, rustic peasant walking by, and decides that guy is going to be his new valuer.
We've all seen this happen. The competent person is replaced by an unqualified sycophant because management wants someone who will just rubber stamp their terrible ideas. The king thinks he's a genius for saving money.
Until a horse dealer arrives from the north with 500 horses.
Right.
The king tells his new idiot valuer to price them. To please the king, the valuer says the entire herd of 500 horses is worth exactly one single measure of rice.
The horse dealer is furious, but the old, wise valuer tells him exactly how to play the system. He tells the dealer to bribe the idiot valuer and ask him, in front of the king and the entire court, what a measure of rice is actually worth.
So, they're all in the throne room. The dealer says, I accept that my 500 horses are worth a measure of rice. But please tell us, what is the value of that measure of rice?
And the stupid valuer, puffing out his chest, confidently declares that a single measure of rice is worth all Benares and its suburbs. Now, the sources note that Benares is a city 300 leagues round.
The ministers burst into laughter. They mock the king, saying, we used to think the earth and the realm were beyond price, but now we learn that the kingdom of Benares is only worth a single measure of rice.
Yeah.
What talents the valuer has. He suits our king admirably.
The ultimate public shaming.
The king is so deeply shamed by his own foolishness that he fires the yes man and gives the bodhisattva his job back.
It perfectly illustrates the absurdity of putting unqualified people in power just because they tell you what you want to hear. The true value of a thing, whether it's a horse, a kingdom, or a clean piece of cloth, can't be altered by ignorance or greed. But you know, as entertaining as these stories of cleverness and satire are, they really function as stepping stones to a much larger philosophical point.
Right. As you move through the Jatakas, there's a distinct shift from practical cleverness to radical, self-sacrificial compassion. A compassion that transcends human boundaries entirely and extends into the animal and divine realms.
To explore this, we are looking at the Nigrodhamiga Jataka, story number 12. In this past life, the bodhisattva is Banyan Deer, a magnificent golden stag who leads a herd of 500 deer in a royal park. There's another herd there too, led by branch deer.
And the human king of Benares loves to hunt, but he does it chaotically, terrifying the herds and wounding many animals who run away and die slowly. To stop this random slaughter, the two deer kings agree to a grim system. They will draw lots, and every day one deer will voluntarily go to the chopping block to be the king's meat.
It's a dark compromise, but it saves the broader herd from constant terror. But one day, the lot falls on a pregnant doe from Branch Deer's herd. She goes to Branch Deer and pleads, Lord, I am with young. When I have brought forth my little one, there will be 2 of us to take our turn. Please pass me over this turn.
And Branch Deer coldly refuses. He basically tells her she just has to bear the consequences of her own fortune.
In desperation, she goes to Banyan Deer, the bodhisattva. And his response is the definition of radical compassion. He tells her to go in peace. He doesn't force another deer from his own herd to take her place. Instead, he goes to the execution block himself and lays his own golden head down.
When the king's cook sees the golden stag on the block, a stag the king had explicitly granted immunity to, he runs to get the king. The king arrives and is absolutely shocked.
You can't believe it.
Right. And when the king hears that this animal offered his own life to save a pregnant mother from a rival herd, he is moved to his core. The king grants immunity not just to the deer, but to all living creatures in his kingdom.
So what does this all mean? Think about how revolutionary this narrative would have been for an ancient audience. We are talking about a world where victory was almost exclusively defined by martial conquest, by physical dominance, and warlords.
This raises an important question about how these stories redefined heroism for ancient listeners. True victory isn't martial conquest, it's moral restraint. It argues that true power isn't about the capacity to inflict violence, it's about the moral restraint to withhold it.
And the scale of this idea escalates wildly. We go from a deer on a chopping block to a literal cosmic chariot war in our final story, the Kulavaka Jataka, story number 31.
Here, the bodhisattva is a man named Maga, living in a small village. He and 30 companions dedicate their lives to civic goodness-building roads, digging water tanks, and keeping the 5 commandments.
And of course, a corrupt village headman falsely accuses them of crimes.
Naturally. And the human king orders them to be trampled to death by elephants.
But the elephants refuse to step on them. The king thinks they have some kind of magic spell, but Maga explains their only spell is that they don't destroy life, they don't lie, they don't steal, and they show loving kindness.
Because of this immense karmic merit, when Maga dies, he is reborn in the heavenly realms as Saska, the king of the Devas, essentially the ruler of the gods.
But the heavens are contested territory. The Asuras, a race of powerful warlike titans, attack the heavenly realm.
And this isn't a minor skirmish. Saska is fleeing from the Asuras in his chariot of victory, which is 150 leagues long.
That's massive.
Yeah, as his chariot tears across the cosmic deep, it acts like a massive lawnmower, ripping up the giant silk cotton trees.
As the trees fall, Sokka hears the agonized shrieks of the young Garua's mythical birds whose nests are being destroyed by his retreat. He asks his charioteer Modely what the noise is.
And when he realizes his flight is slaughtering innocent creatures, he makes a staggering decision. He tells Modely, "Let them not be troubled because of me. Let us not, for empire's sake, so act as to destroy life."
He orders Modely to turn the chariot around. He is entirely willing to drive straight back into the Asura army and sacrifice his own life and his entire empire rather than kill the baby birds.
But, and here is the twist, when the Asura see this massive 150-league chariot suddenly wheel around and charge right at them, they panic.
They think Sokka must be receiving reinforcements from other galaxies. They break ranks and flee, leaving Sokka in undisputed control of heaven.
It is the ultimate synthesis of the Jataka philosophy. The ultimate power move isn't magic or military strategy. It is radical self-sacrifice. Through these entertaining, larger-than-life narratives, the doctrine of universal nonviolence was woven deeply into the cultural psyche. True victory is achieving peace without compromising your morality.
It's an amazing journey we've been on today. We started with Pythagoras and the architecture of past lives. We saw how a dead mouse could create a fortune, how a greedy heart could literally crack like dry mud, and how cosmic deities would risk their entire empires just to save a nest of birds.
While the settings of these stories are ancient and mythical, the psychological truths they contain about the necessity of perseverance, the self-destructive nature of greed, and the world-altering power of compassion are incredibly practical. They aren't just religious lore. They are practical shortcuts to being a more grounded, well-informed person today.
Which brings us back to where we started. If Pythagoras remembering a past life was an anomaly in Greece, the Jatakas suggest it's actually the fundamental rule of existence. The core premise here is that everyone has lived countless lives. So what if you viewed the world through that lens today? How would it change your interactions if you treated the stranger next to you on the bus, or even the stray dog on the street, as someone who might have once been your co-star in an epic, eons-old drama? Something to mull over until our next deep dive.